Hello and welcome back to another Python tutorial. I am redoing one of my Yelp videos because I realized, and I don't know how I missed this, there was no sound on it. And so people who were watching the video could see me typing, but they couldn't hear anything I was saying. So with that being said, I'm going to be recreating the video. And in that particular last video, we were covering the final endpoints of the Yelp API. And these were kind of the more, I would just call them specific endpoints, things like transaction search, things like autocomplete, and then categories and category alias. And so with these endpoints, you're doing something a little bit more specific. So for example, if we go back to our documentation right here, and so remember, the documentation can be found at yelp.com/developers documentation v3. And then from here, you will see over here on this left pane all of the endpoints. And so the first one we're going to be talking about is the categories endpoint. And the categories endpoint will return all the categories that Yelp has in their system. They have a ton of categories. I'm going to warn you right now, there's over a couple hundred. And so that is great if you're looking for businesses that are very niche and something like, oh, I want underwater basket weaving. There probably is a category for that. So it's great when it comes to searching for individual categories that are very niche. But unfortunately, you've got to know how to pass that through. And so with this particular endpoint, all you're going to get back is this huge, wonderful little JSON list, which is basically giving us each category with their alias, their title, parent alias if there is one, country whitelist, and blacklist. So these are the ones where I believe if you go down here, which is whitelisted and blacklisted, so they might not be allowed in certain countries. So just keep that in mind. So in order to use this endpoint, I'm going to jump back into my Visual Code editor. And then before we get started, we do have to import some libraries. The first one is we need to import the request library. This is going to be the library that we're going to be using to make requests. And then we are going to be working with JSON strings. And so because of that, we will be, we will be parsing them. And so we're going to be using the JSON library in order to do that. And then finally, I do have a module that does have my API key in it. So that is just a function that I currently have there, and it's called getMyKey. When I call this function, it will return my API key for me. Okay, so now that we've imported our modules, let's go and build the components of our request. And so here, what we're going to do is build the components of our request. That's things like the headers, that's things like the API key, the endpoint, things along that nature, things like parameters. Now with the categories one, there are no parameters, so we don't really have to worry about that. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to define our API key. So we'll give it something very generic, API key. I'm going to call my getMyKey function. This will return my API key and store it in this variable. So I'm happy with that. And then I'm going to define my endpoint. My endpoint is simply going to be this little guy right up here. That is my endpoint. And so I'm going to put this right there. And then what I'm going to also do is define my headers. So the headers is where I'm going to be passing my API key. And if there were other parameters, well, not other parameters, but things that are related to the headers. So things like content type, things like API keys and things along that nature. So I'm going to define my headers. That's going to equal a dictionary where the key is authorization. And then the value that is going to be put with that key is my API key. But it does come in a very specific format. It's going to be bearer, and then I'm going to put a placeholder. And then from here, I'm going to give that placeholder my API key. So my API key, just like that. And so this will create my headers that I'm going to send along in my request. So now that we've defined the components, let's go and make that request. So make the request to the API. Side note, I started using Visual Studio Code a little bit more often. Love it. Also, I love the dark theme. This is just, it's the high contrast theme, but I love it. It's super, I like the darker themes if you can't tell already, but I just think this is a great theme. Okay, so we're going to make our request. We're going to get some stuff sent back to us. we need to store that stuff in a variable. So convention is you usually just call your variable response. And so that's going to equal our request module. I'm going to call the get method. I'm going to define my URL as my endpoint. I'm going to define my headers as my headers, and I should be good to go. So then we're going to get something back. And so what we're going to have to do is we're going to convert that JSON string into a dictionary object. And so what we'll do is we'll convert the JSON string into a dictionary object. And so we'll call it something, I don't know, like business data, right? Business data is always a good one. And so we'll call our response object, and then we'll call the JSON method. And then from here, I need to print my data. So print data. So I'm going to call the print function, and then I'm going to do JSON.dumps. I'm going to jump in my business data, if I can get to it. And then I'm going to do some indenting. So I'm going to say indent is equal to 3. So I'm calling my JSON library. I'm calling the dumps method. If it has an S at the end, it is a dictionary object. Sorry, it's a string object. And then I'm passing through my data, and then I'm indenting it. And then if I go from here, I'm going to run from the current Python interactive window. And it's thinking. Perfect. And so now we get back every single category. So we get 3D printing. You get, oh geez, I don't even know what that category is. Absence thing. Wow, that's very specific. Acai bowls. So good. Accessories. So fun. Okay, so let's imagine just for a second that you wanted to loop through this particular object. How would you do that? Well, the first thing I'm noticing is that there is this massive list called categories, and that seems to contain all my individual dictionaries that contain my categories. So what I would probably do is I would say for item in business data, and then I'll do categories, just like that. And then what I would say is, okay, if each item is one of these dictionaries, this is a dictionary in itself. So I probably could just take the title from that particular dictionary. So I would say print item, and then we'll do title. So let's see how this would look. So here, what am I doing? Loop through the response and get each category. Something like that. That's how I would do it. Yeah, you can restart it. I don't know if it ran. I don't think it did. I'm just going to close it and then do that. Okay, so then what it did is instead of printing out each dictionary, now we just printed out each title. And the logic would hold the same for each one of the other components. The ones that you might have to be a little bit more careful about are the actual, the countries that have been whitelisted. Because here, if you notice, that's a list. And so what it's going to return back to you is a list object. So if you wanted to loop through that list, you would just have to make sure that you have a nested loop inside of your already for loop. So just keep that in mind. That's the only thing I would kind of give you a heads up on in regards to that. Okay. And then what you can also do is if you want, you can also put a, you can also specify a particular category. So you don't have to get them all back. But what you can do is you can do something like accessories. So this would only return back the information for accessories. So how would that look? Well, if I just take this out and then I run it again, at least I hope it's right. Category not found. Oh, you know what I think it is? I think it takes the alias. So the alias ones are usually all lowercase. And so, okay, perfect. So yeah, it uses the alias name. So my apologies on that. The alias name is always lowercase. That's how you know. And I don't believe there's any spaces with your alias name. So if you go back here to the documentation, well, or they'll give it some like interesting names, it looks like. So they'll just, it might be like a shorter version, but there's no uppercase value. So that's how you know you're kind of working with the alias. So again, if you wanted to just get one particular category, you would use the categories endpoint, but then you would also pass through the name of the category that you want to get back. So this is a way where you can kind of limit what is being sent back to you and saying, hey, I don't want everything. I just want one particular category. So that's basically how that one works. Okay, so now that we've talked about the categories endpoint, we're going to move on to the next one, which is called transaction search. So let's jump back into the documentation and kind of see how this one works. So if we go back to it, if you go under Yelp Fusion, you can go to the businesses endpoint, and then there's something called transaction search. So this is the one that we're concerned with. And so this endpoint returns a list of businesses which support food delivery transactions. Now, they also do put a note here, which is at this time, the API does not return businesses without any reviews. So if there are no reviews for that particular business, they will not be sending you back anything. And then also, valid values for a transaction type are food delivery. So the way I was interpreting this one was you can't do anything else except food delivery. So even if I guess there was a different type of delivery, that would not be a valid request. This one only takes food delivery as a valid request. So you just have to kind of keep that in mind when you're doing it. You'll kind of see in a second. It's not necessarily a little bit misleading, but I don't know. I'll show it when it comes up. But then, anywho, once you've done that, there are some parameters that you can define about your particular search. So one of them is latitude and longitude. So this is, again, doing that more geolocation-based approach where it's like, hey, I'm looking in a particular city. I'm going to use the latitude and longitude. This will obviously get you a more exact position than doing something like location. Location would be doing something like, hey, I'm going to search in San Diego. I live in San Diego. It's a very broad city, so you could be getting back a ton of results. And so this one is the more, I would call it, specific approach. I'm using to find a very specific location. This is a very broad approach. Okay, so now that we understand how this endpoint works, let's jump back into Visual Studio Code. For the most part, everything's going to be staying relatively the same. But all we're going to be doing is we're just going to be working with this one. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste this over that one. And then I'm going to change this to delivery. And we'll see how that one works, okay? And then this would stay the same because I'm still using the same API key. The only other thing I'm really going to define at this point is our list of parameters. So define the parameters of the search. And so this is where we can pass through either longitude or latitude. In this example, let's keep it simple. We'll create a dictionary, which is simply going to have a location key. And then for that location, we're going to have my city of San Diego. Yes, I'm biased. I'm just kidding. No, I like San Diego. It's a great city. It's becoming very expensive, though. That I do not like. I swear to God, we're going to be becoming like the next LA before we know it. Okay, so we've defined our parameters. And again, with our request, what did we do? We just added another parameter. That's it. Don't got to overthink it. Keep it simple. So that's all we did. Everything else is exactly the same. We're still taking our response. We're still converting it to a JSON. We're taking our JSON string, converting it to a dictionary, and then we're just dumping that dictionary so that way we can read it. So this is taking it and converting it kind of back into, a sense, JSON, but that's for a different story. This is so we can read it. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's try it out and see what we get. Perfect. So it looks like it was a valid request, so that's awesome. As you can tell, we get back a list of businesses, and then with those businesses, we obviously have a lot of different details about that particular business. So we've seen this in the other videos. This shouldn't look anything, confusing or new. If you saw the other two videos, all of this information is exactly the same. All we did in this example is we said, hey, the type of business that we're looking for has a particular service that we're interested in, which is delivery. That's all. That's all you have to think about it as. Um, if you wanted to, let's just say, hey, I want to loop through each one of these businesses, how would I do that? Well, we know that there's a list of businesses. So we would say for biz in business data, and then it would be businesses. Uh, where is it? Businesses. And it's funny, I'm actually on vacation and I still get messages. But then again, I am technically online, so that doesn't help. No, I don't mind helping them out. It's always good when I can do it. We try to help each other out when we can. Okay, so let's just say we wanted all the IDs. So in this example, we're going to loop through each one of the businesses and we want the ID for that particular business. So all we would do, we would loop through that businesses list and we're saying for each business in that businesses list, grab the ID. You should be able to notice here, that's just a dictionary. We're accessing another dictionary within a list. That's all. So here, grab the business ID. That's all. I'm going to comment this out, close it, run it. Now you can see you got back every business ID. That's all. So that's how you would traverse that businesses list once you got it back. Okay, let's move on to our final endpoint, which is the autocomplete endpoint. This one, a little bit different, but nothing too crazy. If you go, it's still under the business's endpoint. You just go down to autocomplete. And then from here, they'll tell you what the endpoint is. The description is this endpoint returns autocomplete suggestions for search keywords, businesses, and categories based on input text. So think of it as almost like a Google query in a sense. You know, salons in San Diego or something like that. That's really how we would define it. There's a couple parameters that it does, It does require. The first one is text. So this is obviously the text query. And then we have a latitude, a longitude, or what we can do is we can also specify the locale. So either one of them is fine. We'll see that there's kind of different things that we can do. And then it tells us what we would get sent back. So it looks like what we get sent back to us is the term. And then we get the term.text. So it looks like the text, I think that's the query that we send in. And then we get a list of businesses and then a list of categories. So it might not be detailed information, but ideally what you could do is you can then take your ID and then do a business detail search if you wanted to. So think of it as coming back with a broad list of stores, then going to do a more specific search on that particular store. That's how you should think about it. Okay, so what I'm going to do, jump back in here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this endpoint because now we're using the autocomplete one. Again, almost everything is staying identical. The only thing that we're going to be kind of changing here is our parameters. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to be doing the text parameter. This will be, I don't know, something good food. That's always a good one, right? Who doesn't like good food? And then we'll do our latitude parameter. And then this one, it does not need to be a string. And so here, what we'll do is we'll say 32 715 736. I think this is the coordinates for San Diego. I don't know. I'm looking back at old notes and I'm like 90% sure that's old San Diego, but I'm never 100% sure. 161 and then 087. Okay, so again, we just changed our parameters. Everything else for the most part is going to be exactly the same. I'm going to comment this out. I'm going to uncomment that. And let's see what we get. Okay, so as you can tell, we got a list back of categories. And then we got some terms. So this was a little bit different. This one actually didn't come back to with, I would say, specific stores, it looks like, which is kind of interesting. But we did get back some things like, well, good food near me. You know, I'm kind of curious if I put this in here, I wonder if that would make it any different. just to see if I got a list of stores back. I don't know, but oh, interesting. Still nothing. Okay, well, it is what it is. Uh, so that's how you would use the autocomplete endpoint. You're just changing the parameters, and then once you get it back, you can obviously iterate through it if you wanted to. But really, the biggest thing that I think people get tripped up on is this text component. You're just adding that one, and it's literally just text. It's literally just a phrase like "good food near me," and things along that nature. So, with that being said, though, that does complete this video on Yelp. If you have any questions about how to use the autocomplete endpoint, the transactions endpoint, or the categories endpoint, please put them down in the comments below and I will try to get back to you. Also, if you could, please make sure to like the video. We appreciate the support. And if you're not already, please make sure to subscribe to the channel so that way you get regular updates as we release new videos. I do actually have some more videos on Yelp. We're going to be doing the Yelp GraphQL. And so that's basically using the graph query language, which will allow us to basically make API requests, but instead of getting all the information back, it allows us to do it where we can say, hey, I only want certain information back. So maybe I don't want all the details, I just need the name and the phone number, something like that. We'll find that with the GraphQL, that is going to be our go-to solution in order to do those kind of requests. So that's kind of what's coming up in the upcoming videos. So thanks again for watching, everybody. We will see you in the next video.